not then, and things still remain the same. And I don't wanna play. So you see that this is not the way to be, and the time has come to choose. If it comes down to a fight between you and me, then you are doomed to lose.
Hello and welcome to Socialist Night Live. Tonight we have got some very special guests with us. So firstly, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Paul Daly, who is, you probably know me by now if you've seen it before. If not, then that's who I am. James, do you want to quickly introduce yourself? Brilliant. Mel, who has just had a really, really great interview on Socialist Think Tank on the Origin series. So Mel probably doesn't need that much of an introduction, but we'd like to hear one anyway, wouldn't we? Okay, that's great. Oh, hang on. We do have a little issue here with sound, so I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes to see if I can rectify that. I don't really know what that is, but let's see what we can do. I'll keep chatting while that's going. So tonight we have got a special program about protest. So I'm just gonna James, just say something.
Hello? Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
that's working now. Yeah, it's all fixed. All fixed. So anyway, James has introduced himself. Mel has introduced herself as well. So I'm very sorry for the people missing that. But Yunus is going to get a chance to properly introduce himself now. So Yunus.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks for the invite. And contrary to the caption, I am actually Yunus Bakhsh, not Rachel Meenan. I am a long-standing activist. Been active in the Socialist and Labour movement since the late 70s. Used to be a psychiatric nurse and a branch secretary of Unison and a national executive committee member until I was unfairly dismissed for my trade union activities about 10 years ago. I've subsequently worked as an employment barrister. I'm now active predominantly in the Northeast Health Workers Network and also as the campaigns officer for the Northeast Against Racism group, which is going very well indeed. And as I say, I'm very pleased to be on tonight. So thanks for the invite.
And thank you for coming on. There is a special reason for you coming on, which we'll get to in a little while. But we do want to make a really special mention of something that's happened today. Some of you will be aware that I became the secretary of the Socialist Educational Association a couple of months ago. sadly, the chair, who basically is responsible for having the Socialist Educational Association in the Northeast, Nigel Todd, who worked so hard to bring that together and has done so many things, and he's been an absolute giant of the movement for a very long time. Sadly, he died last night. We're so sorry to his family. We're so sorry for everyone who loved and cared about him, and actually we're a bit sorry for ourselves as well, because he will be really sorely missed. I know you knew him for a long time, didn't you, Yunus?
Yeah, I knew him from the early 80s. I think I really got to know him well when he stood as the candidate for Newcastle Central in the 1983 general election, where he stood against an obnoxious Tory Piers Merchant, we christened Piss Merchants. And Nigel stood in that election on a very principled position, and tragically he lost. It was a dirty election. What the Tories did on the eve of the election was to put out a leaflet claiming that Nigel was an IRA supporter. This was because Nigel had taken a very principled position, saying that the British troops should have been withdrawn from Ireland. It didn't make him an IRA supporter. He lost the election. He took it in very good faith, but he continued to do what he'd always did, which is to work for people in his area. And, you know, I remember him particularly as an absolutely committed anti-fascist, anti-racist who was always there on the front line. He wasn't just somebody who talked about it, he did it. And a great guy, really, very gentle, the most softly spoken but determined guy you could run across, I think. And I was really shocked that he died last night, and obviously I send my condolences to his family. He will be a huge miss. He was one of ours. A real shame.
Yeah, I think we've seen a real outpouring of love to the family, but also just of massive respect for all the things he's done, and there's so many people, and everyone seemed to have a different reason for knowing him, and it is a real great shame, but we will remember him, and I think that's an important thing that we need to do in this movement, because we always hear the stories of people who want us to hear those powerful people in the press, but we don't hear the stories of the real people who make people's lives so much better. And let's tell those stories, and that's a lot of what Socialist Think Tank is about, making sure those stories get told, the stories that wouldn't otherwise be told. So we're really keen to make sure that his legacy lives on. Okay, so the main theme of tonight's show is protest. So last weekend we saw a lot of protest, didn't we? And Yunus, you in particular, you were in the thick of the action, weren't you, in the Newcastle protest? So we're going to go to you again, Yunus, and then I'll bring the rest of the panel in. So can you tell me a little bit about what happened last week in Newcastle?
Well, I mean, we went down primarily to show our respects because we're anticipating a vigil. We said we would have a vigil for Sarah Everard. We'd already been down the day before to lay a wreath, some flowers from North East Against Racism at the monument. And I knew people were going down, so we went down as well, myself and Rachel. And what was incredible was the number of people who turned up. I mean, I know North East Against Racism is one of the co-sponsors, the co-hosts of the event, but it was huge, and it was again one of the best demonstrations I think I've ever been on, even though I wasn't on it for that long. Mainly because of the young people, because of the anger, the way they organised themselves, and the way they conducted themselves, actually. I mean, contrary to the nonsense that's been put out about violence, none of the young people were violent. They were angry, understandably. Who shouldn't, who's not going to be angry about what's happening? Unfortunately, the police thought it would be a good idea to arrest me whilst I was going back to my car, so we could go and pick up my stepdaughter from Craghead. I did explain it to the officer that that's where I was going because they'd kettled us and we couldn't get any other way. But obviously they didn't take any notice of that. And so I was carted off to the cells in a blue light van with my hands, handcuffed behind my back. I did explain to them that I wasn't resisting arrest, but they took me on notice. And in the end, they released me after about 4 hours, I believe with a caution. Completely pointless exercise, because oddly enough, the next day, the police were on the phone asking me, have we got any more demonstrations planned? So on the one hand, they see fit to arrest somebody for doing nothing other than marching on the streets away from a place we'd been told to disperse, and then the next day asking us if we're going to cooperate with them in terms of any future demonstrations. It was an incredible demonstration. I mean, I don't know, maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000, Rachel tells me, because unfortunately for the police, and it would suggest a degree of misogyny, they thought if they took me out the equation, that would be it. Unfortunately, they forgot to arrest the other people there, and other people led it, predominantly women. And it was a exciting and angry event. But the thing that struck me about it was the youth of it. Maybe because I'm getting old, but the youth and everybody had homemade placards. This is something new. Instead of the bog standard, here's one of our placards type of thing, which I've got to say I've been guilty of in the past. Everybody had homemade placards, and I actually think that's a fantastic step forward, because there's far more imagination in those homemade placards than the bog standard ones that have already been made to order, if you know what I mean. So yeah, brilliant. It captured the spirit, I think, of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations that took place in Newcastle last year, and I think many of the people who were on it were on those ones as well. So yeah, a fantastic demonstration, one of the best I've ever been on, albeit for a relatively short period of time.
So the interesting thing for me there is, like, you're seeing it as a really positive thing that people are out protesting, and then also we've got this massive negative there about the way protesters are starting to be treated, because, as you said, it appeared it was going to be a vigil that turned quite different because of, I'm assuming, because of the actions of the police. It doesn't sound like you need to be kettled if you're a vigil, and we saw some awful scenes at the Sarah Everard vigil on Clapham Common. One of the things that worried me, and I'm going to bring in the rest of the panel on this very shortly, but one of the things that really worried me is you are known to the police in a sort of mutually respectful way, I would say, Yunus. Is that fair to say? And you've organised a lot of protests, you've cooperated with the police,
Yeah.
you've done what they've asked in the past, and you do tend to have a good working relationship, let's say. Like, there's maybe certain opinions held about the way they go on and things like that, but in the past I've seen you get on pretty well with the police at a protest. I've been on a number of protests when you've been there, and you're always at the front, you're always communicating. Has something changed? Has there been an attitude change?
It's difficult to say. I mean, look, of course, there are occasions when you don't cooperate with the police because of the nature of the event that you're in. Let's be honest, that does happen. But by and large, it's helpful to at least cooperate with the police in the sense that you say, this is what we want to do. What do you intend to do? So that we don't end up in a situation where people don't know what they're doing, which is a recipe for chaos, and it's a recipe for people getting lifted whole scale and so on. It's about discipline within inside the labour movement, because you've got to have that at times to protect people, to ensure that you'll be able to organise effectively. I sort of got the feeling last week that they were a bit embarrassed after lifting us, because initially when they approached me, it was on the same level as you said before. What's going on? Nice to see you, Yunus. Do you know who's organised it? I said, I don't know who's organised it. It wasn't me. And then when the march set off, their attitude changed. I think that the police will be particularly concerned about what happened at Clapham. I certainly think that was reflected in the way they behaved. But on the other hand, I get a feeling that orders have come in to say, come down hard on people. And that may well reflect an attitude or an approach that is now becoming prevalent um, in the Home Office, and in particularly with Patel, who seems particularly keen on cracking as many heads as possible and upping the ante and creating a climate of violence, really. I mean, again, I know we probably look at some of the pictures from Bristol, but there has been a concerted attempt to try to portray what happened in Bristol as just about, you know, feral youth fighting the police, burning things down. It just reminded me, in fact, of the way in which, say, during the miners' strike at Orgreave, the BBC reversed the order of the film to give the impression it was the miners who started fighting and throwing things at the police, when in fact it was the miners who were responding to the police attacking them. And I think that they're going to try to do that now. And I do think that we are entering into a period where the Tories know there is likely to be large-scale civil unrest because of what they've got planned for us. Because after the lockdown's over, they're going to be looking to recoup the money that they've lost and had to spend on the pandemic. And we know where that's going to come from. It's going to come from our jobs, our services, and they know people will fight back and say we don't want it. And what better way to deal with it than to criminalise legitimate protests on the streets and to try to present us all as lunatics, as, you know, anarchists hell-bent on the overthrow of the existing order, which of course I'm not at all against, but you know, that is how they're going to portray us.
Yeah. So that really fits in with one of the questions that's come in there. What are the panel's thoughts on these new restrictions that suggest it would be unlawful for a demonstration to be annoying, which surely is the point of any form of protest, is to annoy someone. Mel.
Well, I mean, this, as I spoke about in my interview beforehand, what I first got into politics about was a Kill the Bill campaign back in 92, 93. And it's exactly the same kind of bill that is being proposed today. It's the same kind of, restrictions on demonstrations. And it's just, I can't believe that we're still here 30 years later debating this. This has come about again. I mean, back then it was Michael Howard was the Home Secretary, and it's like, he was bad then, but even now, I think the administration now is worse than Michael Howard back in 1992, 93, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And what do we gain from suppressing people from demonstrating about what their rights are? I think this is fundamentally an absolute kick in the teeth for what we stand for as human beings, and I can't believe that we're still having this conversation 30 years down the line. I can't believe it.
James, I know that there's certain things that have really disturbed you, let's say, and we're going to get onto those in a moment. We're going to show a couple of clips, but have you got any thoughts on the specifics of the unlawful demonstration being annoying or anything like that? Because we like to be annoying every now and then, don't we, James?
Oh man, my annoyance surrounds me, is the way I would like to say it. I think it encompasses my behavioral being, to be honest. In a way, I don't believe any protest will ever be not annoying. I think that's the whole point of it. The whole point of it is annoyance. You need to attract attention, right? We need to attract attention to the cause at hand, and by annoyance, if that means shutting down services, that means shutting down services. If that means stopping you getting to your workplace, that means stopping you getting to your workplace. We need your attention. That's the point. So annoyance in category means it's illegal now in determination. So there was a post the other day that I seen on Facebook, and it was in regards to, I think it was the Women's Campaign of Rights, and she was an Irish citizen, and she was a very advocate of women's rights, and she used to go with a bell to every campaign. If that's not annoyance, what is? That's the way I see it. If women's rights would not come about, if that woman didn't go to every bloody campaign and ring a bell in front of everybody's ear every time somebody spoke, that to me is, it's aspirational. It's not annoyance. I want to be that woman as a man. I can relate to that. I want to be annoying to make a change. And if that was not available, and if that was illegal at that point, we would not be where we are now.
I want to bring in a clip now. So this is the clip. The panel have seen it before, so the panel don't get to see what you see at home. Obviously we're at home too, but we don't get to see this. We're just on a normal call together. But I'm going to show this clip now. They have already seen it, and it's the one about it's a journalist, and it seems to me that during this protest, and this is from Bristol, during the protest, the normal rules seem to be off the table. Journalists are normally left alone, and this is quite a development. I'll see what viewers think of this one. Okay, so that was a journalist being hit by the police. They just seem to be standing there, and they were hit in the face, which, well, apparently in the face. What's going on? Like where they'll behave in that way? Yunus, any thoughts on that one?
Well, there's nothing new about this. I was at Warrington in 1983, in November 1983, on a mass picket when a Tory called Eddie Shah tried to, he was attempting to destroy the print unions, the National Graphical Association. And we were down there on a picket. It was an all-night, because obviously their newspapers came out first thing in the morning. There was a mass picket, and it was being covered by the media. And when the riot police charged the picket, the first thing they did was actually to assault the ITV camera crew that were on top of a hill, smash the camera, threw the journalists down. It was like a little embankment, but then they turned the lights, which the camera crew had been using for the interviews, onto the crowd. It is a tactic that they use, because obviously the last thing they want to see now is journalists covering police brutality. And it's not something that's particular to Britain, by the way. It happens internationally. I think we saw it during the Trump campaign, where CNN journalists, covering the Black Lives Matter demonstration, one in particular, who happened to be black, was arrested even though he had a press card. We should be clear that the police will do whatever they're told to do. If they're told to be, take it easy, they'll take it easy. If they're told to go in and break heads, they will break heads, being no doubt at all about that. And having a press card, or even being a legal observer, and I've seen legal observers being clubbed to the ground as well, will not save you if the police are being given their orders to lay into people. And again, I go back to the experiences I had throughout the 80s, where, to be honest, the level of police violence was off the scale, because it needed to be from the Tories to smash the back of the trade union movements. Journalists were frequently targeted. Cameramen, I saw cameramen having their cameras taken off them, the camera equipment smashed. But I suppose in a way, what's changed today is the fact that everybody can report on it and everybody can take a picture of it. And therein lies, I suppose, a means to ensure that they can't get away with that. So we have moved on from those days. But it was shocking to see that, absolutely shocking. And probably what's most shocking is the fact that the media itself doesn't even bother reporting this.
Yeah, that's huge, really. I'm going to bring in Mel now, because someone from the Communication Workers Union, like with the way communication is now, with all of us having these devices in our hands at all times, is that what's going on, do you think? Do you think it's just like, as Yunus said, these things have always happened, but now they can get recorded?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it gives it more traction, if you like. You know, people have got more power to be able to record these things that have happened. But you know, at the same time, what Yunus was talking there about journalists, and I'm going to go back to Battle of the Beanfield and a journalist, Kim Sabido, who did a documentary on the whole Battle of the Beanfield, and there was live footage, and you know, and Kim was in the thick of it, and you think to now, it's like, well, that wouldn't happen now. You know, Kim would not be able to do that kind of documentary because he would be banned by the media, by the news channels. And I just think, you know, it's unbelievable where we've got to. And I think that it's absolutely to do with the government, because if you look back in the 80s and you look at the protests that we had then, and the fact that, you know, the police brutality, it does seem a lot worse than it has been. And in these last few months, certainly with lockdown and all the protests and things that we've had going on for various different things, you know, it seems to have reared its ugly head again. And is that a coincidence because we've got a Tory government again? I don't think it's a coincidence. That's my cynical head on. But you know, I think there's definitely something afoot. Definitely something afoot.
I'm going to bring in James straight after this clip because I know James is particularly distraught at this clip. We're going to warn viewers, this clip does show a pretty violent exchange. If you want to switch off for a minute or two, we would understand that. We know that some people may have been in violent situations themselves in the past. So if you do not like violent scenes, just switch off for a couple of minutes, look away, whatever you want to do, and come back to us when we talk about it in about 30 seconds time. So I'm going to change to that clip now, and we'll come back. So you've been warned about that one, and it is a bad one. It is a bad one. So. So, yeah, that's been on. So, wow, unbelievable. James.
Gets my back up. That's all I can say. I've never seen anybody so weak in my life hit a woman. That's what I'm saying. I've seen people hit women before, and every time they've had a battering afterwards. Not once have I seen a woman being hit in my life and never received a good hiding because of it, ever. That's all I'm saying. And because of it, this is ridiculous. The only reason this is happening is because that man is in a suit, and that man is confronting somebody more vulnerable than themselves, and they are commanded to do so. It may be not their personal problem, but that was sure intentional. That was between that one person and that one person who received the hit. That's all I'm saying. There was no personal in between. There was no ferocity. There was no pretense towards it, other than one person who had power and one person who was receiving it who didn't. And this, to me, is a pinnacle of where we have come as a society and why we need to fight this bill and kill this bill.
It doesn't appear that the police need to have any extra powers. If I look at that, you know, they seem to have the power to that person didn't seem to be a threat. That person didn't seem to be like that. That's supposed to be in there, isn't it? Like if that person is a danger to themselves, or a danger to other people, or a danger to the police, then they would perhaps have to take some action. But that was disproportionate, even if that were the case. And that person's just standing there. That woman was just standing there. And you've got to wonder, what is going on? What are they trying to achieve at the moment? What do they hope to achieve? Is it to try and provoke people? Because that's a very provocative thing. Yunus?
Well, you know, I was a psychiatric nurse for 25 years, and I worked on acute adult admissions, and I also taught people control and restraint. And, you know, we used to be taught by the police in terms of the techniques we're supposed to use. And the starting point was always, if you're ever confronted with a situation which you think potentially could be violent, your starting point is to diffuse it. Yeah. Now, I encountered extremely violent people because they're ill on the wards. My response and the other nurses' response was not to slug it out with them, to knock them to the ground and give them a good hiding, was to attempt to try to defuse the situation. And yet here we have people who would claim to be public servants, just like nurses, who seem to think that they have carte blanche to use whatever violence they see fit against any individual and get away with it. And let's be honest, the police have got away over the years with the use of violence to the extent where, people have died. I mean, Little Towers. I mean, we can go through any number of people. I think over 1,000 people have died in police custody. And yet now they seem to think that they have got carte blanche to use whatever violence. And it's an order that comes from the top. You see, when you have people like Patel, when you have Boris Johnson and so on, who are cranking up the atmosphere, the tension, the police feel that they can do what they want. And when a bill's introduced, which effectively would criminalise even the most passive of protests, then of course the police think they can get away with anything. And we're not saying every cop is the same, but there are certainly police inside that organisation who like the idea of using their power. And I'm got to be honest, if they're ordered to do it, no matter how nice they might appear to be, they will do that. And I just want to go back to something that Mel was talking about. I mean, I was involved in the campaign against the Criminal Justice Act that he was referring to. And I was down in London. I mean, and we talk about violence here. I mean, I suppose because I'm quite a bit older than, the rest of the comrades on this show, on this programme, I've seen violence which makes what we're seeing at the moment seem like kids' play. I mean, I was in Genoa in 2001 when we were tear gassed and truncheoned and people were killed. And I saw the day before we went on the demonstration, a young lad was shot dead by the Italian police. And the day in Genoa was the closest I've ever seen, I've ever felt, or ever want to be, to what I would imagine a police state or fascism would look like, where the police could do what they wanted. We do not want to get to that situation here. We have to do everything we can to stop it. And I do think that actually showing pictures like that it has an incredibly powerful message. And again, we go back to the media. You see, one of the things the Americans learned from the Vietnam War is do not let journalists anywhere near war zones, because they start to report on what war's really about. Yeah. It's not, it's bloody, it's awful, it's barbaric. So ever since the Vietnam War, they've embedded journalists with the army. So the only pictures you get, the reporting, is of one side. You don't see the reality of it. So anybody who's potentially a journalist or an onlooker who could possibly now today use their camera to take an independent shot of what's going on is going to be a prime target. But as James said, I mean, that clip sickens you. I mean, the woman, what had she done? She had done nothing. She stood there and she was assaulted. In any other walk of life, the person who assaulted her would be arrested and carted off and charged with, assault, aggravated assault. I suspect nothing will happen to this guy. There'll be nothing done. And I think it's a harbinger of what's likely to come. I think we're going to see more of this, quite frankly. I mean, you see them in Bristol now. Whilst we speak, they are literally turning Bristol into a war zone, a lockdown war zone, where the police are patrolling the streets with pepper spray and riot shields against young people who are protesting about the right to exercise their democratic rights to protest. Yeah, I mean, it just astounds me. And, that picture sickens me, absolutely sickens me.
Mel, your thoughts on that one?
I think exactly what Yunus has said. It is absolutely sickening, and it's sickening to think that our young people are still having to do this. 30, 40, 50 years down the line. They're still here and doing this. You know, thankfully, we do have some young people that understand what needs to be done in terms of protest. I think it's just horrendous, and I echo what Yunus has said, that this is going to go like, you know, it's going to get really bad. It is, isn't it? You know, it's going to go so bad. We've already struggled in the last few years, and particularly under this Tory government, it's going to get so much worse than this. And I think we've just got to be focused on doing what we know is right, and doing what we know is the best thing to do, and get out there and demonstrate as and when we can, because it's just going to get worse, and we have to teach our young people to get out there. And thankfully, you know, scenes in Bristol, you can see that it's our young people have got the bit between the teeth, and they're kind of getting what we got 30, 40 years ago, you know, and so hopefully, you know, fingers crossed, our young kids are going to start coming on board and getting on with this, and calling it out as it is. You know, it's just horrendous. What I've seen the last few weeks, I have not seen probably, you know, in my lifetime since the early 90s, which is shocking that we're still here and dealing with this now. Can't believe it, to be honest.
Some really good comments coming in, so I'm going to go to a few of those comments. Laura, Socialist Think Tank Laura, who's having an evening off tonight because she's preparing for two really big events tomorrow. One of them's on the political education project, and one of them is the North East Against Racism event tomorrow, which I'll be asking Yunus about a little bit later on before we go. But she has said that broken bones magically disappear in Bristol. What she's saying is they put out a story. The journalists were told a story by the police that there were many broken bones by police officers, which was subsequently retracted. And it's a little bit like one of those Daily Mail stories where they print a lie on the front page and then they print an apology on page 48. 10 weeks.
It went out. The redaction came out as soon as the print was released. It was like a couple hours between. Everybody knows when the prints are released. It was like I think it's like 11:45. I think the final prints are released before it goes into roll, before it's printed out for the early morning. And it was literally like it was about 1 o'clock in the morning when that decision was made.
So yeah, it's like, you know, I suppose we're being a little bit cynical here, and people may accuse us. This leads us on to a question that comes on that might accuse us of being conspiracy theorists or whatever, and surely they wouldn't do that. Experience has told me that we're quite right to have those real clear doubts and those questions asked. Mia Mantry saying it's absolutely disgusting the way this woman's been treated. Whatever anyone does, nothing justifies that. So even if that person had been doing something wrong, like battered in a shield in the face, that's pretty extreme, isn't it? Alison Houghton, she's saying that they lie about anything they like and nothing happens to them. A lot of agreement with Mel as well, from Rochelle. And this is the question I wanted to... Dylan mentioned about police being bussed in from outside being a common practice. That happened in Bristol yesterday. That happened during the occupation of Easington. But David Ray, what does the panel think about the trend to disbelieve what they've seen when footage appears? Has media mistrust and spin made people more cynical about what they see? An example of this is that some people believe that the lady at the vigil in Clapham Common was a crisis actress. So that's a really interesting question. Like, you know, there is a lot, like, not from this panel. I think we have our own beliefs about what we can believe and what we think is maybe a cynical ploy by people. But has this journalistic cynicism and this, a governmental cynicism where they'll release a story and then retract it, has that had this effect where people are doubting everything? You know, James?
I was muted for a second there for some reason. Even I realized. I don't think it's obviously a gameplay that's always happened. It always will. But it's been more prevalent in these times than it usually is. Like, I just think it's a tactic. I don't think it's more in one way than the other, if you get what I'm saying. It's just a tactic that they use. And in this regard, it's definitely one of them. In other regards, they will tell you one story and then tell you another, and then all of a sudden, the first story is the first, but the first story isn't the second. But then the first story gets redacted, so then becomes and then there's this huge spiral of confusion and misinformation, and I think, and then you get funneled through what they call new media, like as we like to call ourselves, because that's what we are. We're new media, right? But you get the far right wing side of it. You get these independent media outlets that are online too, that are magically coming up with like thousands upon thousands of pounds of funding to be able to feature this information. But the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months, you'll not see that outlet again. It's this. It feels like a huge disinformation campaign. And I would just like to make people aware of it rather than being specific about it, because if we focus on the specifics, we get lost in the detail. We need to step outside of that and look at it from an outsider's perspective. Look at it for somebody who's trying to manipulate a situation. That's the way I like to see it. We want to know a scenario that we want to manipulate, right? And you need to step outside of that and see how you can do that. And the way you do that is through media, right? We've always done this. Well, not we. I mean, the Great Britain campaign media outlet that we have, where it's in Australia, it's in the US, everywhere. So what we really just need to do is step back from that and ask ourselves, why is this happening? And how can we resolve it? That's where I want to go with this.
I'm on mute. There's some fantastic comments coming in. No, I completely agree, and I think the narrative is that the police are there to like look after us, and we know, and I know that kind of hasn't happened for quite some time in these demonstrations, and it doesn't happen. And the media narrative is to look at police as they're the heroes, they're here to save us. Look at them getting beaten up on, look at them getting broken bones. And yet when you have a senior police chief telling people that his officers have broken bones, and then what, a day, 2 days later, coming out and saying, actually, that was wrong. He actually lied. Let's not beat about the bush about it. It was lied about. It was a complete lie. But why was that? Why did they do that? Why did they do that? They lie to the media. They portray this, whiter than white police state. And we know from demonstrations and from protests that we've all been on, that we've all seen over the last 20, 30 years, that that's not the case. And I'm going to go back to Battle of the Beanfield and say that this kind of stuff still happens. It is still happening. And for a senior police chief to lie about the fact that his officers had broken bones, I'm sorry, but it's not right. It's not right. And the media need to change their narrative and stop siding on we know that the media are right wing. We probably can't get away from that, but there's something fundamentally wrong here, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason that channels like this need to exist, so we can get alternative opinions out there that are actually not very far-fetched whatsoever, but it's interesting the way people are willing to believe anything that's put in the right-wing media, but unwilling to listen to other stories, and so it's quite disturbing. Like, so let's say if the things that they spoke about, like you mentioned about Nigel being accused of being like an IRA supporter and things like that earlier on, Yunus, and I think those are the kind of things that people are willing to believe, yet they're quite unwilling to believe the relatively normal and an unremarkable truth. So, Yunus, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's understand the nature of the police. The police were never set up to protect us, in my view. They were set up to protect property. That's what they were about, and they were there to police the growing working class in the 19th century. That was their purpose. The police have never once, in their entire history, supported a strike. I mean, they've never once gone down to a picket line and said, you know what? Actually, I think the workers are right here. The boss is wrong. Let's arrest the boss. Never once in their history. And even when the police tried to organise their own union in 1919, that was broken. The strike leaders in London and Liverpool were arrested, imprisoned, and sacked. But the people who control society, the people at the top, know full well that control of ideas is very, very important. Who controls ideas and the dissemination of ideas is crucial. And it's an old thing. I mean, you only have to go back to the turn of the 20th century, where you have the Zinoviev letter, which was a forgery, which was used to undermine the prospect of a first Labour government. We know we've had massive campaigns of misinformation and lies that have been spread to the Tory media. And of course, the media is overwhelmingly Tory, the newspapers. They may not be as important as they once were, but they're still important in terms of the dissemination of ideas. The BBC, for example, is not neutral. In the 1926 general strike, it was specifically told the BBC that they have to act as the voice of the government against the general strike, against the TUC and the trade unions. There is a difference, I think, today, insofar as we have social media. But I mean, James is right. It isn't just our media. The right wing use it as well to put forward racist ideas, fascist ideas, and to try to say it's all fake news. Yeah, anything which, I mean, this preposterous idea, for example, that has been pushed by the QAnon lunatics, that the people who stormed the Capitol in America were Antifa. I mean, and these people believe it. These people actually believe it. It's like talking to people who I used to see in the hospital who used to say we're delusional. People believe that. But I do think that we have to, recognize that actually people experience things themselves and then their ideas begin to change. Because it's one thing saying, well, that's not true, they'd never do that. And then suddenly you're engaged in what you think is a legitimate protest. And suddenly you're the one who's been castigated in the press. You're the one who's been attacked by the police. And suddenly you begin to see how the stuff that was pushed before was a lie. And I mean, people will know I'm not a member of the Labour Party, but I know this. I know the most monstrous lies that I think I've ever seen in my life were directed against Jeremy Corbyn. I remember the crap they used to wheel out against Tony Benn in the early 80s. That was nothing compared with the orchestrated vilification and smear and lie campaign against Jeremy Corbyn. And tragically, unfortunately, it had some impacts, let's be honest about it, amongst ordinary people. So, yes, of course, the battle of ideas is very important, and they understand the importance of that. And at the moment, they control the media. They control the BBC. They control, let's be honest, they actually control the internet. I mean, we saw not too long ago a whole number of groups being shut, having their Facebook pages taken down. This group could be taken off, yeah, because ultimately they privatized social media. It's a private company. It's not public. They control it. So we have to find ways of getting our message across. But I think what's incredibly encouraging is the way in which we have started to see social media being used by predominantly young people to get an alternative message across. The massive Black Lives Matter demonstrations in America would not have occurred had not people filmed the murder of George Floyd. That's the fact. And you can go back further. I remember the beating of Rodney King in Los Angeles in the early 90s. Somebody just happened to film that. It went viral and it sparked riots across America. So, yes, they have all the cards in their hand to some extent, but we also have plenty of cards in our hand if we know how to play them right and we play them properly. And I mean, to be honest, something like this is a really good idea because it gets across ideas. Okay, it might not reach millions, but it reaches some people who then talk to other people. I mean, we've got to use whatever we can, whatever means we can, to get our ideas across and to challenge some of the nonsense which is being fed out. And I mean, the greatest one, of course, we've seen recently is this, the poor Bobby on the beat who was attacked by these rampaging students and bones being broken. I mean, if any other person in any other job, a public servant, was to lie in the way that chief constable lied, they would be up on a misconduct charge. He won't be. He'll be promoted. That's what will happen to him.
Keeping his mouth shut.
Yeah. It's scandalous.
And the public will still believe that there was something else behind it, and that they'll still believe that, well, maybe he was just maybe he thought there was broken bones, maybe he thought this, maybe he thought that. The public will always be behind them because they believe in that narrative.
Speaking of a couple of things there, the comments, some really, really brilliant ones coming in. We've got a couple of negative ones coming in as well, which is quite interesting because I always really like the negative comments because they're here expecting us to have probably some horns and being really, really evil as the idea we're on socialist think tank, but actually socialism is generally quite a nice ideology where we try to care about one another and promote one another and no one's better than anyone else. But there's a nice quote in there from Winston Churchill from I think it's Obsidian.
Yeah, Obsidian.
Obsidian. Socialism is the philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. Its sole virtue is the equality of misery.
It's not the first time we've had that, by the way, Paul. I bet you're any money out and go through this podcast.
Yeah.
And I can quote that for the second time that's been asked, and that's been quoted by Churchill in the chat.
It's interesting. So I'm going to give a Churchill quote here. I do not admit, for instance, that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the black people of Australia. I do not admit that a wrong has been done to these people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place. So let's. I always like to qualify quotes by Churchill with things that explain what type of man he was and what beliefs he held. It's an interesting one to me, that one.
Can I just say something? My mum, who was born in 1930, lived through the Second World War. She was evacuated. She was from Hull, and Hull was the most bombed city in Britain. She hated Winston Churchill. She hated him because he was a Tory. He was a Tory. He was a vicious member of the ruling class, and he hated the working class, and he attacked the miners, he attacked any group of workers, he was privileged. And it makes me sick when these people trot out some phrase he's come out with because of his privileged background and his educational advantages that he had. He was no great thinker. And let's be clear about it. The guy was a racist. He was a warmonger. It just so happened that, and by the way, there's a better quote than that, Paul. He was a great admirer of Mussolini, and he once said, if I'd have been in Italy, I would have been a black shirt. That's what he said. Because, of course, for him, and he said fascism was a bulwark against bestial communism, Bolshevism. And because he saw which side of the class lines he stood on. It just so happened that Hitler and the Nazis, who he had nothing bad to say about until they decided to threaten Britain's imperial interests, suddenly then he was all for war. But the reality is, when I hear these people trot out Churchill as if he's some great thinker, I just think back to my mother who said we all cheered when Labour won in 1945, and we ensured that we'd saw the back of him. And she was a woman who lived through the war, not somebody who just reads about it in books. So I can't stand Churchill.
History is written by the victors and the privileged quite a lot of the time as well. Mel.
I absolutely agree with what Yunus has just said. I mean, there'll be very little that I disagree with Yunus on. But with Churchill, Jesus Christ, people will fawn over him until the day they die. And I sit here time and time again and I think, you don't know shit about Churchill, what he was actually, sorry, my language, what he was actually
You're allowed
about.
to swear on
No
this show.
apologies on language on this show. That's all I say.
I've been
No
really
apologies.
It's a romantification of what Churchill was, because he was there at the helm at the time of such atrocity. But that doesn't detract from the fact that he was an absolute racist. He was an absolute scumbag in my eyes. I'm sorry, he was a scumbag. I'm not down with that narrative at all. He was an awful person, and just for the fact that he was there at the time of World War II, I'm not having it. And I just think people don't quite understand what that man was about.
The thing is, Mel, though, sorry, Paul, but the thing is, of course, the vast majority of working class people in 1945 thought exactly like we did. That's why he lost the election.
Right.
I mean, he tried to suggest that Clement Attlee would be introducing the Gestapo into Britain. People rejected that wholesale, absolutely wholesale. The biggest vote, by the way, the biggest percentage vote for Labour in the 1945 election was amongst servicemen. It was amongst the soldiers, who hated Churchill because he personified the ruling elite, the ruling class, who they weren't really bothered about fascism. They were bothered about defending the British Empire. And, that's why he got hammered. I mean, all these people who sing his praises now, you want to say, well, if he was so great and if he was so loved and if everybody thought that he'd won the Second World War single-handedly, why... Sorry, I think that's Churchill on the phone now to me. Why did they not win the election? They didn't win the election because people knew that he'd sent the troops in to smash the miners at Tonypandy. They knew that he was a ruling class Tory and that he would have taken society backwards. So to hell with all this Churchill nostalgia. He was, as Mel said, a vicious racist, viciously anti-working class, horrendous about women. I mean, he had views today that would make him almost unacceptable to this Tory government, to be quite frank. That's how bad he was. And no doubt I'll get another call from Churchill in a minute.
Alison Houghton said he voted against the introduction of the NHS 21 times. Loads of comments. I think we know our viewers. There doesn't seem to be any dissenting viewers on there. But I just think, does anyone think it's just easy for people to think, oh well, they often think, and someone caught like the wrong end of me saying this before, Britain won 2 world wars and 1 World Cup. That's that really lazy attitude. Of course Britain didn't win world wars. Like, of course it was Russia and it was the USA and it was a coalition that won the Second World War and so on. But isn't it, do you not think it's just easy for people, and like, if they want an easy life, they just go, oh yeah, brilliant, Churchill, really proud. I'm not really interested in what he was like. I want the myth. I want this myth of this man who came out and stuck his fingers in the air and said victory.
Isn't it great that you can just stick all your fucking blames on this one thing, right? Like we've done all of our existence, not our existence, right? All of existence. We've always found this one simple thing that we pinpoint our blame on, right? And I'm seeing this in British society right now, where we're going back in our history and then we're going, what can we blame things on? And then we're skiffling through and then we're going, things could have been different at that moment in history. And that's what we're going to focus on now. And that's what it felt like at the moment, is where, I want this. Everybody has this like idealistic empire moment in their head. right? But oh my God, they didn't have a bloody clue what was going on 40 years ago. Never mind what was going on 400 years ago. So it feels like this pure nostalgia aspect that people are looking for to blame all of the depression, let's call it, all of the economic insecurity that has been provided over the past, say, 50, 60 years of capitalist society. They are looking for a blame. And at the moment, what they've got is an ideal that they want to portray, which is something they hold dear, which would be the British Empire. So I want the British Empire back. That's the way they think. And then they just see this idealistic thing as, oh, one of it was, we're not independent. Let's get rid of the EU. Now that we haven't got the EU, what we're left to blame for? And not just the immigrants. It's not just this. It's not just that. What else are we looking for? It just feels like a random reason. That's all I'm saying. And it's an obscure way to try and direct attention from the real blame. And the real blame is within ourselves. That's all. It's within ourselves, within this country. It's within this British government. It's not within anywhere else. We need to look internally. Stop looking externally. Stop looking at the EU. Stop looking at this ideal of the British Empire. Stop looking at Canada. Stop looking at Australia like what we've lost. It's all history. Get over it. What we need to look for is internally. What are we doing wrong? What do we need to do better as individuals? What do we need to do better as a society to look after ourselves? Distract our attention. We need to focus internally. And we've not done that. The Conservatives sit and say it all this time. Oh, we need to stop looking after them, but look after ourselves. But they never really do that. They never really focus on us. They never really go grassroots. What they do is pretend that they say we want to go grassroots, but then globalize everything.
And then tell people that that's what they cared about, and lionize the idea of the past. So Ann Willis said he's dead. You can't change the past, but you can learn from it and build a better chance for the future. Yeah, and I think that's the point that I think we're probably going to come on to at some point here. There's this really weird thing in the press as well, that when we're protesting, so I think a lot of this, the new rules around protest, they had things like 10 years for knocking down a statue or something. And there's this really ridiculous idea that when we want to have statues of slavers removed, we are somehow covering up history. This really weird thing. Do any of us on the panel think that it's a good idea to cover up history, and B, that pulling down a statue somehow does that? And I suppose C, have any of you ever looked at a statue and learned about the past of our country and thought, that statue tells me all I need to know about the country? And at the same time, we are covering up a lot of our imperial past. That is so massive. So, I suppose that's ended up not being a question, but a statement. So generally, Yunus, what do you think?
Well, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, I remember when during the when the Stalinist regimes fell, how the media thought it was fantastic that all these statues of Lenin and Stalin were being toppled. Oh, that was great. That was great. That was about I remember when the statue of Saddam Hussein was pulled down. That was fantastic, because people are liberating themselves, and because these tyrants, they shouldn't be allowed to have statues. But when people here decide, you know what, I don't think we should have a statue to somebody who made their living, their wealth, their incredible wealth out of human misery and slavery. Oh my God, this is terrible. This is an attack on society. I'd rip every single statue down, every one. We should, if we want statues, let's have statues to Arthur Scargill. Let's have statues to the great, to the people who fought for our class, our side. But You never do you? There's no statues to the women who fought for the vote. There's no statues there. There's no statues to the people who fought to defend or create the National Health Service. There's no statues to the rank and file soldiers. I mean, the whole business about statues is obscene, absolutely obscene, because what it does is it says these people stand above you. They are iconic. You are nothing. These people are so important that they are commemorated in this way. And actually, I mean, I'll give an example. I come from Hull, and as kids, we used to get taken to the Wilberforce Museum in Hull. And, it's great that people think all kids are taught that William Wilberforce abolished slavery and he was from Hull and something to be proud of. And in a way, that's a good thing. But you know what? That's a complete nonsense. William Wilberforce didn't abolish slavery. Slavery was abolished because the slaves in places like Haiti and Jamaica said, we've had enough of this. And a guy called Toussaint Louverture, to whom there is no statue, led a slave revolt in Haiti, in what was then the richest colony in the world, which defeated both the French, the British, and the French and British together, plus the settlers, and established a free and independent slave-free state in Haiti. And, again, there's no statues to him. And I looked at it and I cheered when they pulled that statue down. Why the hell should there be a statue to somebody who made the money out of slavery? I mean, if there were statues to Nazis in Germany, would you say, oh, well, it's part of their history? Can't pull them down. Got to be there. It's cobblers. And just one last thing on that.
Did they not call that piracy? Just to say that right now, it wasn't that revolution, that beginning, they actually classified as piracy because they were disband. It originated from a group of individuals that were employed by the British government as pirates, but then started freeing slavers and freeing the enslaved from the Jamaican islands, and then that propagated from then on. If I'm not mistaken, that's what you're referencing.
No, there's a fantastic book called The Black Jacobins, written by a man called C.L.R. James, which documents the slave revolt on the island of Haiti, which at that time was the richest piece of real estate on the planet because of sugar. Mm-hmm. And there was a slave revolt. It took several years. It was an armed revolt, and eventually they succeeded in driving, first of all, the French, then the British, who sent armies to crush them, off the island, and they established an independent state. They then linked up with the French revolutionary regime, which at that time was at its most revolutionary, and France abolished slavery in all French colonies as a result of that. And Toussaint Louverture went over to France and spoke to the assembly, and his speech was greeted with cheers, and they took the decision to abolish slavery. So it was only when slavery became quite uneconomic that the view amongst the British ruling class was that we really should move towards free labor. Free labor is far more productive than slave labor. I'm sorry I've done lots of meetings about the origin of the slave trade and the roots of racism. And when you read about it, it's a completely different narrative to the one that we're taught here. In particular, that I mentioned before, that the slaves were freed by William Wilberforce. They freed themselves. And again, that's part of ensuring that people think that history is made by great people, not by great numbers, not by the people, not by ordinary people. Hence, you need statues to the great people. You don't need statues to the Chartists. You don't need statues to the suffragettes or to the people who, Tolpuddle martyrs. Where's a statue to the Tolpuddle martyrs? Where are our people, our class? Where are those people commemorated? They're not. Why? Because the people who control society want to tell us that whatever we have, they've given us. We should be grateful for what we've got from them, and therefore we should bow before their idols and their statues. And I used to. There was a band called the Redskins who I used to really enjoy in the 80s. They had a fantastic tune which was called "Kick Over the Statues," and yeah, absolutely, let's kick them all over.
Sad story. The end of the story about Haiti was that France reintroduced slavery 5 years later when
Yeah.
Napoleon decided he did want it after all. And also, they loaded up Haiti with absolutely unbelievable amounts of debt. Stupid amounts. So much so that they've, I think, only just managed to pay it off. These
10
huge
years
debts.
ago.
Yeah.
They were still paying it off 10 years ago. It's incredible.
It's just a disgrace. So I've got a few book recommendations for you as well, James, on that one. You'll love
All
them.
right, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
So
I need them. I genuinely need them. This is a sin. I've only been educated by movies and films the majority of my life. And I would say that is the majority of people also. If it was me, I class myself as the average person. So it just because I've not been read that type of material before, I wouldn't say that that's the same as everybody else. So thank you for clarifying that, and I'm more than willing to read any material as long as it's in audio format. That's
yeah, I've got some recommendations for you there as well. So I'm doing audiobooks at the minute, but Thomas Piketty, if you want to listen to something for 48 hours, maybe not. So Mel, any thoughts on what we've been talking about?
I have some, yeah, I've got a great deal of thought on this situation. So, being a girl that was born in Middlesbrough, I was born literally a mile and a half from where James Cook was born. And if we talk about James Cook in Middlesbrough and Teesside, we think of him as some kind of pioneer and some kind of amazing person. You know, we have James Cook Hospital, we have all sorts of things named after him. And what people don't understand in Teesside is what James Cook was actually all about. You know, he's gone around the world, colonized the world, tried to steal people's bloody countries from them, you know. And in the end, it ended up in his death in Hawaii, thank God, because, you know, he tried to take that from them too. But unfortunately, the narrative still in Teesside is that they're all about James Cook. James Cook, it's our heritage, he's our history. He was brilliant, he was this, he was that, he was that. But do you actually understand his history and what he did, what he was doing, what he went about the world, you know, colonizing all these people? And it's like, well, I don't actually believe that Teessiders understand sometimes what his history is. And I just wish that people would take the time to think this isn't your history. Your history isn't because celebrating him because of what he did. You need to understand why he did that and what he was about, and kind of get that he isn't an amazing guy. He's not amazing. He's not brilliant as you think he is. And I think this is the problem now, is that people don't understand history. They're not listening to history. They don't get what is going on. So it irks me that people think that statues are going to be torn down and our history is going to be eradicated. Nobody wants to eradicate that history. Nobody wants to stop talking about James Cook. We want to change the narrative. We don't need a statue to James Cook. We don't need a hospital named after James Cook. They need to understand what he was about and learn about his history. And I don't think that people genuinely know what that was about. And that worries me, you know, and that's across the board, that's across the country. You know, that kind of thing happens in different towns. There'll be XYZ person who have done this and this for the town. They were born in this town, this happened. But they don't quite understand what their politics were or what happened. And I think that's quite worrying that people don't get the history behind these people.
I think we're about to go full circle on something here, because I want to discuss with you really shortly about what is the importance of protest. So we've spoken there that, like, you know, if we're in this situation where people believe certain things about our history. They have certain beliefs about our history, and they actually have been sold the narrative that the idea of pulling down statues or whatever, or removing them, is some sort of attempt to cover up history, or something, which is really bizarre. It's the opposite, isn't it? It's about exposing history and exposing what really, really happened. And if I had this discussion in my work, and I could see people's jaws dropping when I spoke to them about where the origins of modern racism, which is in the slave trade, because people thought that what they needed to justify, because people always want to believe they're moral. People always want to believe that they're morally correct. And they used to believe in like a deity, so they would say, actually, God thinks that these people should be slaved. It's God's will. That's fine. They can be slaves. Then it came to the point where they actually had a bit of that period of time. Oh dear me, it's got a name, but I can't remember. They started to think, okay, right, we're a little bit more up to date now. God can't justify this. We're people of science. We understand this. So they had to pretend that people of certain skin colours weren't really the same type of human. That is where racism came from. It came from justifying slavery. And the links with racism and slavery, it's so important. But people are like, oh, that happened ages ago and it wasn't us. And it's like, it's all linked together if you understand your history. And it's people who are quite ignorant of that history who seem to want us to keep the statues up because that somehow preserves history. It preserves a lie of history that doesn't really exist.
As a teacher, though, Paul, can I ask you this question? Have you not seen this studied in history about just how many slaves were in these ships that were getting shipped from? Well, it was a triangular relationship. I think people know this type of thing where it was, this is how they got around it, right? They traded one thing for another and another thing for another and another thing for another, just so it could go across continents, right? So we're not just on about trading commodities for commodities. This is, well, you can call them that. That's the way they classified them back in these days. It was a commodity of one thing. Stop off I'd say Western Africa, for example, on the on the West Coast, and then trade slaves as a commodity over to America, and then from sugar plantations in America, what were actually, planting these plantations and cropping these plantations to come all the way back to the UK and Europe. So I had a massive lead of train of thought there, by the way.
Yeah, I could tell, James. You went off on.
Oh
but,
my God!
Are you asking if
the relationship?
Are you asking me whether we teach anything of that slave trade? I'm not a history teacher, and I would maybe teach some.
The responsibility of the educational system.
I'm a maths teacher, so I have to teach the curriculum, and funnily enough, they're narrowing that curriculum all the time, and they're saying we can't tell people things that are anti-capitalist, even, which is absolutely bizarre. But Yunus,
by central government.
Yeah, listen. Right? I mean, there is it's not on audio. There's a fantastic book called The History of Black. It's called Staying Power. It's the history of black people in Britain by a man called Peter Fryer, who was actually the Daily Worker correspondent during the Hungarian uprising in 1953. And it is the most comprehensive and detailed book, which goes through how, as Paul rightly says, there was no such thing as we understand racism before the origins of the slave trade. There was ignorance, there was superstition. But in order to justify the enslavement of human beings, they had to perform all types of ideological somersaults. Because, of course, at the time, the people who were profiting most from the slave trade were what you would call the emerging capitalist class. And they used to argue, did they not, that we are for freedom, equality, liberty, fraternity, all men are born equal, which is their rallying cry against the aristocracy. And then somebody said, well, hang on a second, you're making your money out of the denial of those basic rights to people who were slaves. Aha. They're not people, they're animals. If you read the stuff, you see that the stuff that came out of the slave colonies and out of the West Indies was the justification for saying that black people were not actually human. And therefore, if they weren't human, there was nothing wrong with enslaving them and treating them like animals. It's changed, although not massively in some respects and for some people, but we're not taught that in school. Kids aren't taught that in school at all. And it goes back to what everybody's been saying here. You know, the people who control the dissemination of ideas can determine that. And that's why, for example, they have been so keen in terms of ensuring that the curriculum does not challenge the prevailing narrative about how society is run and how it's been formed. Because my God, you don't want to tell people, do you, that the vast, I mean, incidentally, I know we're going off topic, I suppose, but people should know that there was an enormous anti-slave campaign in Britain at the time. Slavery was not popular amongst what you would call working class people at the time, for the simple reason that many of them identified with slaves because of the conditions they labored in, and they thought, well, hang on a second. Yeah, these poor buggers are in chains. We might not have any chains, but the same people who are exploiting them are exploiting us. So if you read about it, the anti-slavery movement, and certainly in the Northeast, there was a massive anti-slavery movement, was predominantly a working class movement. So, I mean, we're not taught that. And we have to find a means of getting people to relearn not relearn, discover their history of our class, of our people. And then you have an entirely different view of history, one which, as Mel says, doesn't see James Cook as an explorer, but actually as a colonialist. I mean, the only recorded instance of total genocide in human history was carried out by the British against the Tasmanian people. They killed every single man, woman, and child on the island of Tasmania. Every single one. They hunted them like animals to eradicate them. I don't recall anybody mentioning that when they talk about James Cook. I mean, it always makes me laugh, and because my dad, of course, was from India, and he used to say, I always used to laugh when they say these people discovered countries. Who the hell lived there in the first place? What? So Christopher Columbus discovered America. Great. Tell it to the people who lived there. Anyway, sorry, I digress. It's late at night.
It was a good digression. So the last few minutes, I'm gonna turn to the comments as well. But what I want us to think about for our sort of closing comments would be, where would we be without protest? Had we not been allowed to protest, what freedoms would we currently lack? And I think it's quite. I think there are so many examples. I think we should be able to answer that one. But looking at them, Steve's tuned in, and he said he's tuned in late, but it's great to hear a Borough accent. You've got kind of two Borough accents here, haven't we? Ish, yeah. Ray Goodspeed earlier on wanted to say hello, Yunus. He said it's been 40 years since maybe in Newcastle in the 70s, and he's delighted to see you on here. And Ray, big friend of the channel, and yeah, just lots of agreement with what we're saying. Also, someone's asked, Mark asked if how did my day as Che Guevara go? I dressed as Che Guevara the other day when I went to school. I was asked if I was dressed as Stalin by another member of staff. So, so maybe I taught a few people a few things about history. In the non, I suppose, not the conventional history that we are taught in this country. So maybe someone learned something there, that I wasn't Stalin. He's a different human. Anyway, and I wouldn't have dressed as Stalin, to be honest. He's not really, it's not really great, is it?
Not really our type of socialism, though, is it?
Not exactly a role model, is he?
No, he's not great. That like pretty much genocide he did. Really, it's a tick in the negative column for me for Stalin there.
A bit, didn't it? It might have been for me, but you know.
So right, let's get back to what would we lose had we not have been able to protest. Mel.
Oh God, what would we lose? Jesus, like I mean, look at us. Firstly, as women, look at us as women. What would we have not gained if it wasn't for protest? We would not be sat here with this voice. We would not be sat here voting for MPs, for councillors, for whatever. We would not be sat here with any bloody right if it wasn't for the suffragettes, for the women that campaigned for it. So that's where we're at. You know, that's what protest did. And if you think that protest doesn't fix anything or do anything, you are very, very wrong. And you need to look at history, look at what the suffragettes did, look at what the women did. You know, that's what we need to do, and carry on with that. And anything that comes our way, that gets in our way of getting what we need to have a fair and equal society, we need to get in front of it and stop it with protest and demonstration.
Thanks, Mel. James.
Yeah, I would just like to mention maybe most recent stuff about protests. Like, what wouldn't you achieve if you didn't protest or say, Shrewsbury? Yeah, it's took like 50 years for it to happen, but they protests. They went along for 50 years saying the same thing, protesting about the same thing. They finally got a decision in the courts. Yes, it's not full recourse, but at least it's something. I would just like to say that all protests, doesn't matter how big or how small, makes your voice heard in a bigger way. That's all you need to know. And I would advocate anybody who's trying to get their voice heard to protest in a respectable, meaningful, but deliverable manner is the most effective way, I would say. And when I say deliverable, it doesn't mean legal. It doesn't mean right, and it doesn't mean wrong. If you believe in what you believe in, go for it, protest for it, and achieve what you want to achieve.
Thanks, James. Yunus.
We wouldn't have anything. It's as simple as that. As simple as that. We wouldn't have the right to vote. I mean, the Chartists were the world's first workers' movement in the 19th century. They fought for universal suffrage. The ruling class didn't give us universal suffrage. We had to fight for it. Had to fight for it all the way down the line. So the most basic thing we take for granted, the right to vote, is something we've had to fight for. Every other form of rights. I mean, you know, in my lifetime, homosexuality was unlawful. 1967. Women didn't have the right to control their own bodies because abortion was illegal. I mean, all those things were fought for. The right to the Tolpuddle Martyrs, the right to free association, trade unions, all the things which flow from being in a trade union, having a weekend. Yeah, having a weekend was won by us. The 40-hour week. You know, you talk about statues. In Chicago, there's a statue to the police, the head of the police, who there's no statue to the Haymarket martyrs, the people who fought for the 8-hour day. But there is a statue to the police chief who framed a number of the union activists, and they were hung. The interesting thing about the statue is it's surrounded by huge metal columns. And I asked a Labour historian who's taking me around Chicago, why is that? He says, because every single year, a truck driver from the Teamsters Union used to demolish the statue by driving his truck into it in protest and in solidarity with the trade union movement. In short, we would have nothing. We would have nothing unless we fought for it. Every single thing we've got, we had to fight for. They've never given us anything unless we've been prepared to fight for it. I mean, Quinton Hogg once said, if you don't give the people reform, they'll give you a revolution. That was the end of the Second World War. We got the NHS because they were frightened of us. They were frightened of what would happen if they didn't give us those things. So protest is the motor of history. Unless we have protest, then we get nothing. absolutely nothing, because they'll never give us anything. And what they're now trying to do is take it away from us and restrict our rights to fight back against them. And that's what the new policing bill is about. And that's why it's so encouraging to see so many young people sticking two fingers up to them and saying, you can do what you want, but we ain't going to give away what past generations have fought for. And that for me is the great hope for the future. I mean, you know, if I die tomorrow, I'll be pleased to die knowing that there's a new generation coming through who aren't going to put up with this shit anymore. And I hope I don't die tomorrow.
Yeah, we hope you don't as well. We're all for your your longevity. You know, keep going. So I'm just going to ask you.
Struggle keeps you young.
In your case, it definitely seems to. So it's good for us all, that one. I want to finally just end up on some closing comments, which would be: have you got anything coming up? Have you got anything coming up in that we need to plug, basically? So James, I'm guessing you're going to plug Socialist Think Tank here.
Oh, of course. I always do this. No, I haven't got anything coming up. I just would like to express a deep gratitude to everybody who goes out into these protests, comes up with ideas how to do it, organizes them, everything along them lines. I would personally be more than willing to discuss any strategy or technological solution to make this more effective. That's my moving forward. If you would like to go to socialistthinktank.com, click on become a member, please do so. It's free. And if you are willing to contribute. Doesn't matter. You're treated exactly the same. You get all the same rights, all the same voting rights. Doesn't matter. Just do it. Get involved. Thank you.
And Mel.
Well, you know, my sentiments are quite the same. Get involved. And I'm going to speak particularly to communication workers in the telecom sector with my union, Communication Workers Union, and the Count Me In campaign. Obviously, we have announced that we are going to ballot for industrial action. We will do that, and we need you on board. We need you now. We need you to protect your rights and get involved with us. So do contact me or message that you know on here, whatever you need to do, but do follow us and get involved in the CWU Count Me In campaign, because we need you and you need us.
Brilliant. Yunus?
Well, tomorrow there is a Northeast Against Racism meeting, which I am incredibly excited about. I mean, it's going to be huge. I mean, there's over 500 people interested or going in it, which is an amazing achievement given, you know, it's a regional group and NIA's only been in existence for less than a year, on women, misogyny and racism, how the far right have attempted to weaponize women's oppression. But because of what's happened in the last couple of weeks, we've broadened it. I say we, I mean, Rachel's been the driving force behind this. And we have got a tremendous panel of women speakers. And what I just want to say about it is that I've been to so many meetings over the years where it's the great and the good. I mean, I'm not against the great and the good, but I mean, I also think that there should be a space for rank and file activists. And I think one of the reasons why so many people have liked this meeting is not simply because it's caught the mood, but also because it's people speaking from the ground, grassroots activists. No, not MPs, trade union officials, etc. But these are people who are engaged on the front line of the struggle. So that's tomorrow at 5 o'clock. It's a Zoom meeting. And I know Laura is speaking. But we've got Natasha from the Reclaim the Streets campaign. We've got Black Lives Matter activists, etc., etc. I mean, they're all there. It's all on Facebook, and it's absolutely, it's going to be brilliant. I know Rachel's sweating about it because she's going to be chairing it, but I've told her that it is a fantastic initiative and one of the best ones. And you know, all power to her and all power to the women. And just one other plug: 6th of June, Northeast Against Racism has called a demonstration in Newcastle. to commemorate the anniversary of the first great Black Lives Matter demonstration in Newcastle last year, which had over 3,000 people on, which you could see the video done by Dodsey for it, which is phenomenal. I mean, not because I chaired the event or whatever, but because it was a fantastic day. And we're having a unity demonstration, if you like. We are pitching it around the fight against climate change, the fight for the right to defend the right to protest, the fight against racism, and the fight against misogyny. We want to link all those struggles together, because if anything about this tonight, it's that actually there is more in common. We have more in common than we have that divides us. And if we bring those struggles together and the protests together, we have an enormous strength. And you know, we talked earlier about how the police will use violence. The one antidote, the one way you ensure that demonstrations are not violent is turn out in your tens of thousands. And that's the point at which the police stop being violent and start to respect your numbers and your strength. And hopefully June the 6th, and we'll want people from around the region to come, will be a show of strength in all those campaigns, bringing them all together. But tomorrow night, 5 o'clock, get on the meeting about women. That's going to be a cracker.
Absolutely brilliant, thank you. And my little plug will be the Political Education Project tomorrow. I love what we're doing. I love the fact that we're all linking up together, whether that's Political Education Project, Northeast Against Racism, Socialist Think Tank. And I think I'm quite proud of Socialist Think Tank, the fact that we will get ourselves involved with all of those campaigns and try to bridge between different organisations, because we've got to do this together. As Yunus said there, if you turn out in your numbers, we've got the numbers if we all stick up for one another, if we all, like all the people who care about these massive issues, if we all back one another up on all of them, then we do have the numbers, and I think that's absolutely vital. So Political Education Project, you can do both that and the Northeast Against Racism meetings, because one of them is 3 till 4:30, 5, and the other one starts at 5. So you can do both of them, and Laura is preparing speeches for both of those. So a busy day for Laura tomorrow. It's rather her than me, but anyway, all for the greater benefit of the movement. Become a member of Socialist Think Tank as well, as James said earlier on. It's free. You can choose to contribute if you want, because we do have some costs, but you do not get any special privileges for paying in this. If you can't afford to pay, then you get exactly the same treatment as any other member, and that's the way I think it should be in any sort of socialist organisation. But we do appreciate those people who do contribute as well, who can afford it. Okay, so thank you so much to all of you. We'll have a kind of couple of minutes debrief at the end of it, find out whether we've enjoyed our drinks or not tonight. And we will say goodbye to our viewers now. Thank you so much for the comments that have been coming up on the screen. So important that you play a part in the show, because the viewers are an absolute integral part of this show. We love seeing the comments. Sorry if we didn't mention yours. They were such high quality, I couldn't get to every single one of them. But thank you again, and we will see you soon.
Keep the red